Hello, and welcome to Williams Mullins Benefits Companion, a podcast that helps employers navigate the complex legal challenges of managing their employee benefit plans. I'm your host, Bryden DeWitt, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a new guest to our podcast, Lisa Drake, Managing Director at Sageview Advisory Group. Welcome to the Benefits Companion.
Thank you, Bryden. Glad to be here.
Lisa serves as president of the National Association of Plan Advisors, commonly known as NAPA, which plays a significant role in shaping retirement plan policy, education, and best practices across the industry. And I had the pleasure of participating in a NAPA event in Washington, D.C. In 2025 as a guest panelist, and just realized what a great organization it was, and it was clear that how influential the organization is in bringing together advisors and service providers, attorneys, and thought leaders to address the real world challenges facing plan sponsors and ERISA fiduciaries. So I thought it'd be great to have you come on to the podcast and kind of let our listeners, our plan sponsors, employers kind of get a behind the scenes view of NAPA and how it supports the various investment advisors and fiduciaries dealing with plans. So I guess just to start, for listeners who are not familiar with NAPA, can you explain what NAPA is and why it matters so much to plan sponsors and benefits professionals?
Sure. Thanks, Bryden. Yeah. So I always start with, saying what NAPA is. It's not Napa Valley, California. We don't focus on wines, but yeah, NAPA stands for the National Association of Plan Advisors. It's an organization under the American Retirement Association, or ARA Association, out of Washington, D.C. So NAPA specifically focuses on has three main objectives. One is advisor education. We'll talk, I'm sure, in the next few minutes about all the educational opportunities there are for retirement plan professionals in the industry. But that's one big focus, is education for the advisor community out there. The other is advocacy for plan sponsors, and that's one of the big ones. This organization, NAPA and ARA, they're the only advocacy group in Washington, D.C. that focuses on retirement plan advisors and the retirement plan industry specifically. So we have a voice through ARA and through NAPA to push policies and regulations that support what we do as advisors, as plan fiduciaries, and ultimately improve retirement outcomes for the people that we serve. And then the third aspect of NAPA is networking and community. So you and I, Bryden, met at the 403B conference in DC just this past year. That's just one of the many events that NAPA hosts throughout the year. There's different events based on what specialties you have, but there is a lot of opportunity for advisors to network with each other, not only with other advisors, but ERISA attorneys, providers, other specialists, just to share best practices, insights, and keep a pulse on what's going on in the market and in the industry altogether.
And I thought that 403B conference was really helpful in that regard, just the networking and the education that it provides.
Yes. Great, thanks. And thanks for attending that. There's a few other conferences we'll talk about. The main one, kind of our main event, is coming up in April. That's the NAPA Summit. This year's in Tampa, Florida. And there will be about 3,000 people at that conference. So that's our biggest conference yet. Everyone that's engaged and highly active in the industry is there, all the providers, and there's a lot of sponsors, a lot of opportunities for not just learn more and get some knowledge on different topics, but also to network with a lot of industry professionals. But NAPA overall, we have over 20,000 members across the US. So it's a large organization, and what we do is important because it indirectly influences the quality of services and advice and education and resources that we have available to deliver to our plan sponsors and participants, really.
So you mentioned how NAPA is involved in advocacy and policy discussions. Can you share how that work directly impacts employers and the advisors who support them?
Yeah, so ultimately, NAPA, through the ARA, we're the voice for the employers, right? We serve as our clients' voice up in DC. So while NAPA represents advisors, we represent tons of employers and participants. And really, the idea is to ensure that the realities that are reflected in policy discussions, make sense, right? When these policymakers make decisions, a lot of times we're disconnected from reality. We saw in Secure 2.0 a lot of many provisions, some which were easy, some which were very complex. Sometimes there's good intention behind these, but ultimately, when it comes to implementing those, they're not as easy or may not make a lot of sense. I just got off a call a few minutes ago with our fiduciary team, When we talked about, for example, part of Secure 2.0 was the ability to allow for plan sponsors to give the option to employees to elect their match as Roth versus pre-tax. It makes sense. I get it. But to try to implement that, it's not as easy as one would think, or as it said. So we haven't seen a lot of traction with that one. But ultimately, what we want to do is make sure that we are, making sure that we're carrying the best interest of our clients when we're talking, to these policymakers, and that their needs are effectively represented in these conversations, even though they're not directly participating in those discussions. And one big way that we do that is through the NAPA fly-in. So every July, a lot of advisors throughout the country, about 200 or so, we go up and have our NAPA fly-in in DC. And we have representatives from every state. And we'll go up to Capitol Hill and meet with our senators and sometimes staff members and so on, just to talk about what policies are important to us, which policies we want to support. If we are opposed certain policies, we give them reasons why. And we tell them real case studies, right? We work with these employers and we participate every day with the everyday working American, and we tell them why this is important. Why is the CITs in 403Bs is important? I know there's a lot of stuff behind that, but ultimately we're trying to do what's best in the interest of that teacher that's serving, in the public capacity, for example, and doesn't have the same access as a private worker.
So turning the focus away from policy and advocacy to plan sponsors and fiduciary, how does NAPA help support and elevate plan design, governance, fiduciary best practices, especially as we receive new regulations, we're anticipating new ESG rules, Secure 2.0. What is NAPA's role with respect to helping plan sponsors and fiduciaries comply and stay in the best position they can from a ERISA fiduciary perspective?
Yeah, so there's the traditional, methods. There's tons of webinar opportunities and training online and so on. But a lot of it is focused on the educational content and curriculum that it creates. There's, about a dozen or so different types of certification, or maybe there's a designation and so on that's available through NAPA. And I also should have clarified in the beginning, NAPA, as I mentioned, is under the ARA umbrella, but we're one of 5 sister organizations. So there's PSCA, which is the Plan Sponsor Council of America. There's ASPA and TSA and so on. So the PSCA focuses the audience, and the membership is strictly plan sponsors. NAPA
Right.
is the advisor. So all the organizations together, ARA really wants to make sure that we're just serving the retirement plan industry as a whole. It's not simply just focused on what we want as advisors. So the educational content is always going to be neutral, right? So whether it is, regulations, a lot of it is education, like I mentioned. Just last year, we launched a program on managed accounts, for example. So managed accounts has been a bigger topic. They've been around for a long time, but NAPA thought that we needed to provide that education and training from a fiduciary lens to advisors out there. We're not taking one side or another, whether we recommend managed accounts or not, but it's to provide the framework and the governance process and what advisors should be doing when evaluating these products. And now we're focused on alternative investments in, private assets and digital currency. So we have a program launching this April on that. So it's just providing the education, making sure that, we're keeping the members up to date on any new policies and regulations through not only the webinars and the conferences, but educational content as well.
So how would someone who wants to become more involved with NAPA become involved or participate in your programs?
There's different ways to get involved. Honestly, a lot of people ask me how I got started and how I ended up being president. And about 6 years ago, I was nominated to be a member on the leadership council. Not sure who nominated me. It just happened, and I got approved. And I was supposed to serve a 3-year term, and they liked me enough to nominate me as president. So it's 6 years later, here I am still serving. One of the reasons I welcomed the idea to serve on the council was because it gives me the opportunity for me personally to represent Sageview. I've been with Sageview for several years. Sageview has always been a well-regarded, respected organization in the industry. So it was just one other way for us to be involved. We've always been members of NAPA, well represented there. But it's also a way to give back to an industry, a career that I love. Many of us love what we do, and I include myself in that. So it's a way to give back to the industry and to others, to pour into others, the next generations, a generation of emerging advisors in the industry. And many of us advisors really do care about what we do. This is not just a job. I think take it very serious or personal when we know that we can impact the lives of working Americans out there, the participants that we serve. So not only is it self-fulfilling, but it helps me become a better advisor to my clients, sharpen my skills, and just fine-tune my craft so I can be better every day. There's always something changing, something always keeping us on our toes. So, NAPA and ARA provide that avenue for us to keep engaging and keep learning.
Yeah, and I agree. It's so important, especially with so many Americans relying on defined contribution plans and investment returns. The balance of their account is what they're relying on for their retirement. And plan sponsors, I preach that ERISA holds plan fiduciaries to the prudent expert standard. And so, unless you're an expert in investments, you need advisors, plan advisors. And it's great that NAPA is there to support plan advisors so they can provide the best service to ERISA retirement plan fiduciaries. So, thank you once again, Lisa, for joining me on the Benefits Companion.
Thank you, Bryden. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me today.
So, that'll wrap up this episode of the Benefits Companion. If listeners have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please contact me. You can also visit our employee benefits page at williamswellin.com/employee benefits. There you can find out more about our team, as well as past episodes of this podcast and legal alerts. Finally, be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when our next episode posts. Thanks for listening.
This podcast contains general condensed summaries of actual legal matters, statutes, and opinions for information purposes. It is not meant to be and should not be construed as legal advice. Individuals with particular needs on specific issues should retain our services or the services of other competent counsel.